Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining the MySQL talk. I would probably like to start with a small comic. And well, working for a US-based company like Oracle, you're getting a big fan of Dilbert. And when you follow these routes, you probably know what I mean, that all these big companies do have big marketing campaigns and marketing announcements and this stuff. And finally, when it comes to the GA product, you're getting probably a bit disappointed. Now, what does it have to do with MySQL? Well, MySQL is open source, and open source obviously is a bit different because there is not the one GA day when the product is suddenly released, whereby there, in most environments, there are versions available up front. And this is the same for MySQL. So therefore, even though when you recognize some of the slides being marketing, well, most of the marketing slides can be proved, and most of the stuff which I'm going to demonstrate can be downloaded and you can test it. And that's the point where I want to start. Well, as said, thank you very much for joining. My presentation, one more thing, it's about MySQL 5.7. So the upcoming release of the existing MySQL product. My name is Carsten. I'm working, in fact, for Oracle. And well, since yesterday evening, I know that there are some concerns with regards to Oracle and MySQL being part of the Oracle story, but please do me a big favor for the moment for the presentation, forget it, and we discuss it in the Q&A session. And every concern which you still have after the presentation, please let's discuss it during the Q&A talk. So, it's 45 minutes. I think at the end we will have 5 minutes of Q&A. I will be around today and tomorrow, so in case that you want to have an extended discussion, please feel free to ask. Now, I'm obviously not an official Oracle sales or speaks person. So therefore, I am referring all my slides and all of the stuff which I'm going to tell you right now, pretty much based on this person. This person is called Thomas Ullin. And Thomas Ullin is the head of the MySQL development. So he owns the development group of MySQL, of Cluster, of Workbench, of everything which you pretty much know. And he, in fact, is a sales and spokesperson of Oracle. So most likely what he says is true. And he did a presentation at the Pacona Live event kind of 2-3 weeks ago. And most of the slides which I'm going to use are more or less the same as the ones which he used. And most of my statements, in fact, are based on his statements. And in case that you are interested in the full source of this presentation, you probably want to click this link. I assume the presentation will be available on the internet, on the web page, in a couple of hours or something. So in case that you press this link, you will get to a YouTube session and you will see the original session. As said, this is Thomas Ullin, and he made this presentation about 5.7. Well, that said, the Oracle policy say that I have to present this slide. It is basically saying that everything what I can tell you is probably true, and hopefully it is, but in case that it isn't, you can't sue me. So, so I'm sorry for this, but these are the Oracle rules. In fact, I'm trying to be as accurate as possible, and in fact, I've not seen a presentation from my colleagues or from me, which at the end were not true, but it can happen, let's face it. So MySQL within Oracle. So by mistake, I have to say, we found out that it's 20 years of MySQL right now. So MySQL is not really a new product. And it's about 10 years of InnoDB. InnoDB was already owned by Oracle before the Sun acquisition. You probably know that Sun Microsystems acquired MySQL, and Sun was acquired by Oracle, and therefore MySQL is part of the Oracle portfolio now. But then again, InnoDB was even acquired before the Sun acquisition, so it's 10 years. And the MySQL group is within Oracle since 2010, so it's more than 5 years already. So, well, this is just a heads up. Now, when you look at the engineering and at the Q&A stuff, obviously there was a big investment in the group. In fact, I'm not 100% convinced that the numbers are true because, well, even the InnoDB team, when we merged the team, were quite a few people, so probably it's even more. But then again, these are just the marketing numbers. And as I said, I assume it's even more. And in case that you probably can consider working for MySQL as a developer or in another region, we are still looking for a lot of people. And the good thing with development is that we do not really have a strong focus on countries anymore. We are looking for experts in the database engineering group and in the engineering areas. And therefore, it's more or less not relevant where in the world you're working. And as I said, in case that you can consider working for the MySQL group, probably you want to go to the careers page of Oracle or just give me a ping. Now, all of these people in the last couple of years, they pretty much worked on one of these topics. So one of the big topics which we are going to look at is InnoDB, it's replication, it's the partitioning, it's lossless semi-synchronous replication, global transaction ITs. So most of the development in the last, I would say probably 6, 7, 8 years, it's somewhere in this region. And we will go to some of the details during this presentation as well, and we'll have a look what in fact has changed with the release 5.7. Now, even though MySQL is part of Oracle, we still have a big community team. So we are still investing in the community sessions. We drive the MySQL communities in the various countries. We are submitting talks. The two big events, in fact, for MySQL, and this is probably getting a bit important at the end of my session when we speak about timing for 5.7, is that officially, of course, we are not developing for certain marketing events, but at the end you will see that there is the Oracle Open World, which typically takes place around autumn, about fall in a year, and there's the Pacona events. And you will recognize that most of the big announcements which we are doing with regards to MySQL are either at this event or that event. So in fact, I do expect some major announcement at the next Oracle Open World, which is, I think, planned for the first week of October, and it's getting probably more important when we speak about timing later on. Now, since 2010, when Oracle acquired Sun Microsystems, these are all products which were released under Oracle. You probably know some of the products, you probably do not know all of them. Most people just know the database, so the core Oracle database, and again, we do have version 5.5, and we do have a product called the MySQL Cluster Suite, which is basically not based on the InnoDB storage engine, but it is based on the NDB storage engine. And again, there is a lot of development going on with regards to the MySQL Cluster product as well. So as said, most of the other products you probably haven't heard of before. Some of you probably have, and we go to some of them, as said, during this presentation. Now let's start at looking at MySQL, the view from the mill. So quite a while ago, there was the release 5.7, and 5.0 and 5.1. This was before 2010, and I'm trying to quite often to refer to Windows because a lot of people, in fact, do know Windows. So I would say that is probably the area of Windows NT4 or probably Windows XP or something like this. So this is the time of 5.7, 5.1, and there was a focus, in fact, a strong focus on the MySQL storage engine. This has to do with persistent storage for web databases, for the Web 2.0. This is the area where MySQL comes from, right? So you probably still use it, and still a lot of Linux distributions are using this version of MySQL. Now, after the acquisition of Sun Microsystems within Oracle, there was a new release called MySQL 5.5, and the big change between 5.0 and 5.5, and in fact, there was nothing in between. There was no version 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, or something else, so there was just 5.5, was that it was based on InnoDB. So it's a transactional storage engine. It's not doing any full table locks or something else anymore like the MySQL one. It is so-called ACID compliant, multi-version concurrency control. And a lot of optimization has been done on Windows. This basically was the first release within Oracle, and as I said, the big change here was that we moved from the MySQL default to the InnoDB default. A lot of people say that MySQL at this time was a lot more SQL-ish, so it scaled much better, the behavior of the SQL, the ACID compliance, all of this stuff was pretty much, well, they call it more like more SQL-ish at this point. So this was a kind of the first release within Oracle. After about 2 years, a bit more, we released release 5.6, and the release 5.6, when I look at this release, I'm always referring to, well, there was a big difference in the replication. So in case that you start fiddling around with 5.6, probably the first thing what you need to recognize was that the whole replication has completely changed. There were lots of new options. So in case that you set up replication in 5.0, it still worked in 5.6, but you had lots of more features and functionalities in replication. You can use the multi-threaded functionality. There was a thing called global transaction IDs. So again, a lot of stuff has changed. There is another thing which probably not all of you have recognized, there is an interface available in 5.6 called NoSQL. It's basically a Memcache plugin, which we discuss a bit later on as well. But basically, the traditional way of getting access to MySQL just on SQL is still, of course, available. But there is a new way available since a couple of years now, based on the NoSQL on the Memcache interface, well, even in PHP, of course. So the big thing with 5.6 is that some of the biggest web pages in the world, in fact, are using 5.6. So I'm referring quite often to Facebook, which I personally think is a very bad example because I do not have a clue of Facebook at all. I'm not aware of their architecture. I'm not exactly know how they set up this stuff. One of my big reference accounts is Booking.com. They are operating from Amsterdam, from Holland. I know much more details from them, and therefore I'm quite often referring to Booking.com or to Facebook, having in mind that probably they've done it in the same way. So, and we introduced a thing called MySQL Fabric, which again we will discuss a bit later. And yeah, well, what is 5.7 about now? That is basically the area which I would like to concentrate on. So first of all, there were again a lot of InnoDB changes. There's gist support available. There is a query rewrite plugin available, so temporary table up based on in-string tables going forward. There are multi-threaded slaves even for single schema databases available. There is multi-source replication, group replication. There is MySQL Fabric. There is Semisync Plus, and so on and so forth. And we are discussing most of this stuff a bit more in detail now. So let's start. How is the MySQL development team working as of today? So first of all, MySQL is still open source. There was no change when you look at MySQL, at Sun Microsystems, or at Oracle. So all of the stuff which I'm going to demonstrate you is pretty much based on open source. And you can download the stuff from Git in case that you're used to it. So well, it is open source, full stop. And this is true for the Labs release. This is true for the so-called development milestone releases. This is true for the GA product. So we are using Git. I think this change was implemented mid of last year or something. Before it was based on the Bazaar tooling. So in case that you're actively promoting code to the MySQL team, you probably recognized already, but again, is all of the code based on Git? To be honest, I'm not 100% sure. Every time when I'm doing this presentation, I'm trying to figure out what went wrong, and then basically afterwards I'm forgetting it. I know that some parts were based on Launchpad, the Fabric or the sys support. I'm not sure whether this is still true or not, but at the end, Git or Launchpad, I think from an open source perspective, they are both. Okay, so MySQL is open source. That's simply a fact. Now, there are two probably pre-releases to the JA product. One is called the Labs release. We discussed this in a second. And the second one is called development milestone release. And what is happening basically is that once we start with a feature, once we start with an idea, we are starting with a so-called Labs release. And the Labs release, at the given time, when a lot of people have tested them, when we said, well, it's right from the coding, from the securing, and so on and so forth, they are promoted to a so-called development milestone release. And you can already see that from a development milestone release, we are at level 7 now, so at release 7. And it's 5.7.7, it's the release candidate already. So we are expecting a second release candidate, and hopefully we will have the GA product then. And normally in between this development milestone release, we see a kind of 2 to 4 months life cycle. But basically, we start with a MySQL Labs release, which call it alpha release or preview release. Then we are promoting the code to the development milestone code. And the development milestone is very often already used from a lot of customers on production system. It's still not recommended because it's not fully tested. But then again, a lot of people are using it. And later on, we will have the latest, the so-called GA products, which are officially supported from a MySQL perspective. As said, this is just the database, the MySQL database. There's a lot of stuff going on. You can see it on the right side. There is a workbench. There's the MySQL cluster. I'm not very much concentrating on this right now. And of course, there are a lot of connectors as well. So once you register on the MySQL news group, you will see about a release, a new release of something about once a week or so something. So 5.7, release candidate 1. So where are the main changes? So again, it's mainly the InnoDB. We discussed this in a second. It's replication, it's the performance schema optimizer, it's gist support, and of course, it's the security. And remember, Dilbert, from the beginning where I said, well, you can download it already. So the product is available there. It is available as open source. It is available as a binary. You can download it, give it a try. You can run it on Windows. You can run it on Linux, on Solaris, on Mac, or whatever, FreeBSD, not exactly sure which operating systems we are supporting there. And the first thing with new releases is always about performance. Now, I'm not that interested in the amount of 100, 200, 300,000 or something else. It's just an indication that MySQL is a kind of, well, twice as fast as the release 5.6. Whereby 5.5 was a kind of, well, 3 times slower than the existing 5.7. So performance is still a big thing for MySQL, and especially when you do have a lot of connections to the MySQL database, the significance between these releases are very big. At the beginning, I said that there is an interface available, and this, as said, this is already in the 5.6 product, so you don't have to wait for 5.7, it's already in 5.6. But then again, when you look at the Memcache plugin, you can recognize that 5.7 is even much faster than the existing 5.6 version, and 5.6 is already, compared to the classical SQL version, round about 8 to 10 times faster as classical SQL. So have a look from the application perspective. We do have the classical SQL interface to the MySQL server. I think that's what you're using as of today. But keep in mind, in case that you require high performance, or you want to use the Memcache plugin for other reasons, there is a Memcache protocol available, which basically means that the data itself at the end is stored in the InnoDB storage engine. So the storage engine for both environments is pretty much based on InnoDB. And you can access this data from SQL, and you can access this data from the Memcache protocol as well. So both versions are possible. This is possible in 5.6 already. This is not future looking or something else. It is already in the product. Give it a try in case that you want to. The Memcache protocol which we are using is pretty much based on a key value access, a key value store within MySQL. In case that you're using Memcache, probably before, you probably are aware of this concept. This is a very dangerous slide because I'm pretty much not an expert in PHP, and this is a slide which I just grabbed from a colleague of mine, from Johannes Schlüter, who I think is very common in the PHP community, and basically said, well, it's rather simple to set up an environment, and within the PHP environment, you do have the option of still having SQL access to the InnoDB or asset to the memcached one. This is the same for 5.6, and this is also true for 5.7, so not a big thing. Another thing with regards to performance is the connection time. So we figured out that some customers, in fact, do have very simple SQL statement, and the time for connecting and disconnecting the MySQL database, in fact, does have a very significant impact on the overall performance. Not because the SQL is slow or fast, it's just because the connection time has a fair amount of the overall time. And therefore, the connection optimization was a big part of 5.7. So when you do have very simple SQL connections, the connecting and disconnecting time for the release 5.7 should be significantly faster. I'm not sure it says 1.7. I recognize that this slide was already about a year ago or something, so it's probably even faster as of today. So this slide is already a bit of outdated from my experience. But as at the time to connect, even for smallish SQL statements, is much faster. InnoDB, so what has changed? Well, a lot has changed. So first of all, some of the InnoDB environments, some of the InnoDB buffer pool can be resized online now. So you probably know that InnoDB and buffer pools, we are sending this data to the memory of a MySQL environment, and then it's in memory, it's flashed down to disk, so memory does have a significant impact on the overall performance. So the more memory you have, the faster MySQL normally behaves, up to the level where the whole database, in fact, is in memory. Now, what can you do in case that the database is growing, or let's say it's increasing? Today, you basically have to set the variable and you have to do the restart. This is, of course, not sufficient for the users or for you, because basically you have to have a service interrupt there. Now, given release 5.7, you can do this stuff online. You have to wait until the transactions are basically committed, but then again, it's an online operation starting release 5.7. You do have a lot of more options in SQL. You have separated undo table spaces. You can do dynamic configurations. You do have server statement timeouts. So a lot of this stuff, which is discussed heavily on our news group, in fact, is already in the release 5.7. And as said, is part of release candidate 1. Download it, give it a try. Another big thing is online alter table support. Now, again, this is not really new. It was already in 5.6. There was a huge bulk of information which was already part of the existing 5.6 version. In addition, 5.7 do have enlarge varchar rename index function. Especially, I think rename index is probably a quite common solution. And again, for 5.7, there is no restarts or locking or whatever you're doing there necessary anymore. Other stuff, improved full text search. In fact, it's much faster in 5.7. ZGK, it's probably not that relevant for our region, so China, Japan, and Korean support. As I said, I don't think it's a big thing for our region here, but most likely it is for the Asian region. We do have enhanced Fusion IO integration, so Fusion IO cards are getting very used, especially in web environment where you have high requirements and high demands for MySQL. We do have support for 32K and 64K pages, which is getting very important, especially when we're speaking about the compression options which are available in InnoDB. And again, it's more or less all about additional performance and additional function. Replication. Replication was already a big thing to change in the release 5.6. And again, in 5.7, we do have some significant changes. So probably the first thing, which especially in case that you're operating a big MySQL environment is quite relevant for you, is global transaction IDs. Global transaction IDs was something which we introduced in 5.6. It basically gives you a unique identifier within the bin log and where the MySQL replication is with regards to the master. So quite straightforward. Now, the migration was a bit tricky. Basically, what you need to do, you have to restart your environment at a given time, which basically means, again, there was a service interrupt. Now, given release 5.7, you can do this as an online operation. As said, for a lot of customers, especially for bigger environment, this was a very big and very significant step. It means that when you're migrating your environment from older MySQL versions to 5.7, you can enable the global transaction IDs and you can do the online stuff without doing the interrupt on the master environments. So semi-synchronous replication, you probably know that in the replication environment, normally it is based on asynchronous replication. We now do have semi-synchronous replication. Again, this is existing in 5.6. Now with 5.7, we extended this version. Basically what you can do, for example, you can wait for several slave environments to acknowledge this information first. The time when we commit this stuff to the storage engine has changed as well. So basically there was a kind of a big push on the semi-synchronous replication part with release 5.7. Later on, we will see that there is a synchronous replication option available in 5.7 as well, but this is not part of the release 5.7 as of today. And then we do have multi-source replication. Basically, the idea is that normally you do have one master environment, you do have a couple of slave environments for read scaling. Now, you can do it the other way around now with release 5.7. Basically, you do have multiple servers, multiple master servers, and they're all fitting towards one slave environment. So you can have, for example, a server in Amsterdam, in Antwerp, in Brussels, in Luxembourg, and you can consolidate this environment on a slave environment somewhere else in the world. This is a great feature, especially when it comes up to backup or to consolidate data. Performance schema. May I ask you, who's using the performance schema already as of today? So, okay, not a lot of people. So performance schema, for those of you who do know dtrace from Solaris or strace from, it's pretty much the same as for MySQL. So MySQL, in fact, does have internal technologies for doing internal monitoring, very, very granular monitoring of MySQL environment. This was already available for CPU, for disk I/O, and so on and so forth. And starting version 5.7, we have the method for doing the memory instrumentation as well. And especially when it comes up to the replication and the monitoring of the replication in slave environments, there are far more options in 5.7 available now. This schema, because performance schema was quite a tricky thing to do, especially when you are used to use with MySQL environment. We created a new view, and this view is already available in the actual workbench. So it's not really a new feature in 5.7, it is already available in the workbench, but within the release 5.7, it's part of the plain product, so it's already available for all of the products. No need for workbench anymore. And this gives you a simplified view on the performance schema. So even though that a lot of people are not using performance schema, but you have a kind of the highest cost environments, the hotspots for InnoDB, the hotspots for I/O, and so on and so forth, can be very easy to find out with the sys schema now. You do not need certain in-depth knowledge about performance schema anymore. You can just use the sys schema, which is a simplified view on the performance schema. It's just a select, or you use the workbench and you get the graphical interface. And as said, it's open source. Feel free to use it. Optimizer. A lot of stuff has changed in the optimizer. There is a cost model attached to it. You know that the actual environment, you do have a lot of environment where to tune. So disk I/O, network I/O, CPU, memory, and so on and so forth. And the optimizer is much, much more flexible with regards to optimizing which area of the MySQL statement, which way or which level of the parsing environment. So the queries at the end with release 5.7 should execute much faster, and you should need less CPU and less disk space. So when you do the calculations, you will probably see this kind of slide. So in the left part, well, still it's around, I would say, probably 30% or probably 25%. So the time to execute, in fact, has really decreased already. But the big significant will take place once you use the disk environment. You know that disk environments are typically about 1,000 times slower than the memory environment. And especially in case that your database does not work out of memory because your InnoDB buffer isn't big enough, you will see a big, big, big impact on the new cost model with regards to the SQL thing. Now, we do know a lot of applications, especially content management environments, where we exactly know why they are slow. The problem is we do not develop them, and therefore it's always tricky to say, look, can you change this query? Can you do this one? Can you change this order? In most environments, this will not happen. We know applications where MySQL doesn't work exactly just because the query basically is bad. Now, one thing with 5.7 is that we will have a rewrite plugin, and, well, let's do a kind of what will happen in the future. We will have select statements which we automatically want to change or which we automatically want to optimize given on the knowledge which we already have that the query is bad. So in the release 5.7, we can get grab incoming queries. We can replace parts of it, for example, the join order, the index order of environments, and basically given on the knowledge which we already have, which are bad, the queries, we can simply monitor and tune them very easy. GIS support. So one of the big environments where MySQL was much better was when it comes up to spatial indexes or GIS in general. So this was a kind of the niche market where, in fact, InnoDB was lagging behind MyISAM. Now, it has changed now. With the actual version, we implemented the boost geometry, which basically means that all the calculations with regards to GIS can be done very, very fast, very, very effective. So in the old model of three-dimensional indexes or something, you can, well, basically forget them. You can just use the native MySQL command for using GIS functionality now. So at the end, for you, it means that location services, for example, within MySQL can be very, very easy addressed, much easier, and from a CPU perspective, much cheaper than in the actual release 5.6, and you can still use the InnoDB version. So security is always an issue with MySQL, and as said, given that there is the big Oracle browser watching at MySQL as well, we do have to get to the Oracle security policies, and therefore we changed a lot of the stuff. So you can have automatic user password aging, the user create command has changed. So we basically just adapted the state-of-the-art security within MySQL now. So to address the Oracle security needs as well. Just a side note, it's not very often mentioned on our page. We do support syslog now. There are a lot of options of syslog. Timestamp functionalities, for example, can be very, very easy addressed with the actual 5.7, whereby with 5.6 there was an option of doing this as well, but it was much more trickier, whereby with 5.7 it's natively available. So that's basically the Labs releases and the development milestone release. As said, we are at release candidate 1. We do expect release candidate 2 in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. I don't know. I do not have any insight. But as said, given that there is the Oracle Open World again in October this year, I personally think that there is a good chance, a fair chance, that we will see 5.7 within this time frame. But as said, I do not have any insight. It's just doing the calculation. Release candidate 1, release candidate 2, and the GA product. It perfectly fits with the open world. But as said, this is not official statement of Oracle. It's just my personal feeling. And then, once the development milestone release is available as a GA product, it's called the Community Edition. And the Community Edition, we are at release 5.6 at the moment, and there's a lot of good stuff with the 5.6. You probably know the replication, so you've got the master environment. The master environment is replicating the infrastructure to the slave environment. So this is old stuff, and as said, I assume you've done this already. Now there is a thing available called the MySQL Fabric. As said, this is not future-looking. This is already existing. Now the difference is that the connector is not automatically connecting to a master environment, but before it is asking the MySQL Fabric, underneath there is a MySQL database again, which tells the connector where to store the information and where to address the information on a master and a slave environment. So the big difference is that there is a connector. The connector is not directly connecting to the master or slave anymore, but to the fabric. And fabric tells the connector what to do. And you can do a lot of cool stuff with the fabric. So for example, you can tell the connector to, for example, update the other servers as well. So there is a master, there is a primary, there is a secondary master. And once this status has changed from the MySQL Fabric, because the connector first asks the MySQL Fabric on where to put stuff into, it's rather simple to have very, very easy HR forms together with the Fabric environment. So Fabric, a very cool technology, especially when it comes up to big environment. The not so good thing with the connector is that you have to change the connector. So the connector, as said, is changed. We do have a connector for Python, for Java, for PHP, for .NET. There is a Labs release of the C connector, but as you can see, we do not support all of our connectors as of today. This will change going forward, but this is the limitation as of today. And another cool thing, what you can do with the MySQL Fabric, you can easily shard your data. So for example, based on range or hash or a sharding key, you can tell the connector, well, all the data from this year should go to this environment, and all the information from the older years should go to a different environment, which means that half, for example, of the data is residing on this farm. As said, there is a failover farm, plus you've got the slave environments available, and you've got the other 50% of the database, for example, which run on another environment. So as said, this is not related to 5.7. Of course, we will improve all of this stuff in 5.7, but this is basically already available. So give it a try, give it a test, especially in the PHP environment. I would say that probably half of our environment, in fact, is based on PHP, and therefore, as said, it is available, give it a try. So MySQL Cluster is, again, it's an open source product. It's available as MySQL. It is available. This presentation is not about MySQL Cluster, therefore I put it a bit away. But be aware that there is a full MySQL Cluster environment available as well. It is based on MySQL. We do not use InnoDB here. We are using the NDB storage engine. But as said, it is available already. Now, everything what I mentioned until yet is basically open source. It's open source. It's available. You can use it free of charge, full stop. Now, what I'm going to tell you right now, it's pretty much based on the commercial edition. So the big difference between the commercial and the non-commercial version of MySQL is that there is support available. So the big difference between the commercial and the non-commercial version is the support offering. So once you start needing support for MySQL, you probably want to have support either for the open source version, so for the community version, or for the commercial version, depending on your license needs. So different entities do have different requirements. Some require GPL, other require a closed environment. It's up to the customer. And based on this support, we are providing management tools and advanced features. And one of the cool features which we just, and we are adding features. For example, there are special tools for the backup environment. There is a plugin for the enterprise manager. We do have an own monitoring environment. We do have tools for the authentication. We do have tools for auditing. So these are all tools which you are allowed to use during the support phase. There is a new functionality available since a couple of weeks, which is called the enterprise firewall now. So the enterprise firewall, it runs on top of the MySQL database. And basically what you're doing is you run your application and you put it to a record mode, and we are recording all the SQL statements which are allowed, and then you enable the firewall, and then you are just allowed to run these SQL statements. And every other SQL statement, which is not part of this whitelist approach, is basically blocked. So this is, again, it has to do with regulations, with legal in the corresponding countries. But it's getting very, very important. As said, this is a new functionality. It's available since a couple of weeks. It's rather new. It's just available in the commercial version. Give it a try in case that you want to. You can download it from the Oracle pages, from the MySQL pages as well. Basically, as said, you put it into a recording mode, then the statements are set on a whitelist, and everything which is not part of the whitelist will be locked out and will be basically not be allowed any further. So just to summarize, so MySQL 5.7, it's much better with regards to performance and scalability. It's much faster than even the release 5.6. There are a lot of replication improvements. There is a new optimizer, which means that the ad hoc performance should be much, much, much better. From a management point of view, especially the MySQL Sys environment, it's part of the plate-based product. It's already available in Workbench for the existing environments. We do have improved security. So part of this is open source. The other one, which I just mentioned, the whitelist approach, the firewall approach, is part of the closed edition. So what else? We do have the MySQL Cluster environment. I did add the corresponding support lifecycles of the products as well. You probably know that there is a Workbench. You probably know there is a YUM installer available for MySQL. There is the MySQL utilities and the Fabric, the MySQL connectors. In case that you are interested in any of these tools, just ping me after this session, or just go to our webpage, to mysql.com, and have a look at it as well. In case that you're interested in the full details of 5.7, there is a blog available. Well, when you print it out, it's probably about 300-400 pages or something with all the changes which went starting release 5.7 about 2-3 years ago. And you can go on the corresponding changes of all of the products. So as I said, it's a big, big, big environment, and especially in the InnoDB environment, I don't know how much new features we add, but it's a lot. And as I said, we are at release candidate 1 as of today. I expect the release candidate 2 in a couple of weeks. And as I said, I personally think that release 5.7 will be sometime out in 2015. And as I said, Oracle Open World is usually quite good timing for this. So I think I am close to my end of my session. Is this right? So it's the end, and this means that we have 5 minutes of Q&A now, right? Yep. Okay, so Q&A. Questions about MySQL? No question at all? Okay, I'm not sure whether the recorder is still running, but given that I still have 5 minutes, which is a kind of expected, then, yeah, well, what happened after 5.7? This is, again, what will happen once 5.7 is out. And you may remember that during my presentation, I said that there is a MySQL Labs release available. And I said that most of the stuff went into 5.7. So now there are some options which are not part of 5.7. And, well, this is probably the stuff where release 5.8 or whatever the name will be considered. So there is a thing called JSON support, there is a thing called group replication, new data dictionaries, and new HTTP plugin. So some of this stuff probably will happen in 5.7, probably that is one of them. So there is document support, JSON support for 5.7. I mentioned Thomas Olin at the beginning of my presentation. In this presentation, he said that this plugin will most likely make it in the final development, in the final GA product. So according to his words, most likely it's still at the Labs release, but according to his words, we most likely see this functionality even in 5.7. As said, at the moment it's Labs release, so therefore I'm always careful, but Thomas knows much more than me with regards to this. So as said, this most likely will make it into the product. The other thing is group replication. So as said, normally we do have asynchronous replication or semi-synchronous replication. Group replication is a new way. This is not the MySQL cluster. This is a kind of a new thing based on a plugin. And as said, it will be implemented in a later product. I personally think it won't make it in 5.7 GA, but again, we are looking into it. Another thing, data dictionary, this is a thing which Facebook very hardly pushed because this is a kind of the actual limitation when you look at the performance of MySQL. And once this is implemented, we will see the next level of performance tuning within MySQL. In case that you have any other questions with regards to MySQL, you can either ask me, or at the end, there is a very tall person, he's called Ron Hesch, he's my colleague. And in case that you have questions, you can ask him as well. The big advantage of Ron is he's Dutch, I'm German, so he probably speaks your language, whereby I personally do prefer German. But anyhow, as said, thank you very much for your attention. See you soon. See you probably later at the beer bus. Thank you.